Chapter 2. Nicolae Carpathia sat behind the office desk at his estate in Bucharest, fully aware that steepling his fingers beneath his chin was a power cliché. Leon Fortunato squirmed in the chair across from him. Whether Leon had ever noticed that Carpathia's chair sat on a platform an inch and a half above the floor, Nicolae could not tell. The perch allowed Carpathia to subtly tower over any guest. Nicolae was amused that Leon had been out of sorts ever since getting the drift that he was not as close to Carpathia as he had clearly come to believe. Nicolae's allowing his advisor to inform him of the Russian attack on Israel, then revealing that he himself had helped finance it, seemed to have crushed Fortunato's spirit. And naturally, that was the point. Fortunato was an asset, but there was always value in keeping everybody in one's orbit in their proper position. Leon could be useful, but only if he knew and kept his place. The Roman was a strange combination of character traits. He could be obsequious, yet also diplomatic. He was differential, but also sensitive to his situation. Carpathia would have to start rebuilding the fragile ego while not softening the sting of the latest embellishment of rank, especially with the bizarre, otherworldly malfunction of the assault on Israel. Oh, there were more millions where those lost on the operation had come from. But having come away from the fiasco without access to Chaim Rosenzweig's precious fertilizer formula, Carpathia had come to a hard realization. Seething, he deduced that his promised place at the top of the world would not be established on a foundation of wealth. No, it would have to be built on diplomacy, or what appeared to be diplomacy. In truth, his rise must be fueled by power. "I have an assignment for you, my friend," Nicolae began. Leon tilted his head back slightly and pressed his lips together, touching the knot of his tie, then pulling from his pocket a tiny leather note card holder. "At your service, sir." "You are troubled, Leon." The heavier, older man sighed and shifted in his seat. "I simply prefer no surprises." "Such as my part in the recent dust-up in Israel?" "Yours and the Mr. Stonagall's, yes, sir." Carpathia covered his face with his hands and rubbed his eyes. "We need to clarify Mr. Stonagall's role as well, Leon." "Clarify?" "You must know that while he was in on this with me, and he chose not to inform you, that was my request. In reality, he serves me as you do." "He serves you? Don't his financial resources outweigh even mine?" "Yes. But surely you must understand that he is, in essence, a supplier." Fortunato appeared genuinely surprised. "Is that so? I thought the new golden rule was that he who has the gold makes the rules. Yes, that is hardly novel or original. And the fact is, neither is it true. My wealth potential is limited, and I expect to have not just access, but also ownership of Stonagall's fortune one day." "Indeed? If you do not believe that, Leon, perhaps you would rather be working for him." Fortunato shook his head, and Carpathia saw sadness in his eyes. "Make no mistake, Nicolae. I have hitched my wagon to your star, and though you apparently don't appreciate that, I am willing to prove myself to you." Carpathia studied the man. This couldn't be working more perfectly. "You realize that this room, in fact, the entire estate, is surveillance-proof." Leon appeared depressed. "Of course, sir. I oversaw that personally." "And so, what we say here stays here." Leon nodded. "Let us walk, shall we? And then plan to join me for dinner. What would you like?" Nicolae rose and allowed Leon to help him don his jacket, then buzzed Viv Ivans and asked her to send their food order to the kitchen. When they arrived back, their meals would be served. As they strolled the grounds of the rolling acreage that looked out over the vast Romanian capital, Nicolae was reminded of their first get-acquainted walk, and how he had sensed king-making potential in the unprepossessing Italian with so many contacts. At the highest point on the property, Nicolae suddenly stopped and turned to face Fortunato. Carpathia's 2 primary bodyguards held back about 50 yards, and 4 others lingered at their posts farther away on all sides. I want to be the next president of the Republic. I know. I am putting together a team of... But I have decided I do not want to wait for the next election. I don't understand. Of course you do, Leon. You once told me, on these very grounds, that you would do anything I asked, even to the ultimate degree. Fortunato raised his eyebrows. Surely you're not suggesting. I am not suggesting anything. I am telling you that I want Vasily out and me in. Can you or can you not get that done? I will do my best. Your best had better be success. You will have my whole heart, sir, but understand, I assumed you would campaign and be elected in the traditional way, and I am fully expected you to win in a landslide. Nikolai sat gingerly on an outcropping of rock and put his elbows on his knees, resting his chin in his hands. That whole idea bores me, and it would take too long. The time is now. There is the matter of a protocol, the law, the succession of format. I am not interested in the obstacles, Leon. I am interested only in the outcome. Georg Vasily is a proud man, Nikolai. He will not surrender easily. I do not care how easily he goes. I merely want this to be his idea, with his blessing, his urging of the government and the people to not only accept it, but also ratify it. But how? Carpathia looked knowingly at Fortunato. Do I have to do everything? You want me to plot this and effect it? No, it's just that You are so enamored of Stonegal. Do you realize Jonathan holds the paper on Vasily's businesses? Well, that's fortunate and could be strategic. Could be. The man gets a kickback on billions of dollars worth of government contracts, and he gets them now. Every weapon of war, for instance, translates to a colossal boon to his secret bank accounts. But surely his business ventures are in trusts as long as he is in office. Oh, Leon, do you really believe President Vasily would surrender access to his entire affair, his fortune, to live on the government stipend? Well, of course he would not, and he has not and does not. The man is guilty of not just political scandal, but also crimes against his own people. If what you say is true, we could virtually blackmail him into stepping down, ruin him, make him a destitute, or threaten to. Nikolai nodded slowly. If necessary. But it must not actually come to that. I do not want to assume the power of a deposed ruler. For one thing, it would be more difficult to skirt the system. I am telling you that this must come from him, be his idea. I must reluctantly assume the role with his full endorsement, as well as that of the government and the people. No small order, sir. You longed for a significant assignment. There it is. Irene Steele had made the difficult decision and pulled the trigger. With her husband attending church with her less and less, and her spiritually reprobate daughter off at Stanford, Irene had switched churches, taking son Ramy with her. How rich it was to sit under the teaching and preaching of the avuncular Vernon Billings at New Hope Village Church, and to see her dear friend Jackie every Sunday, and how Ramy loved everything about church. That, she knew, bothered Rayford. He attended church no more than once every 2 months, and slept in or golfed most Sunday mornings. Then seemed to want to make up for it by urging Ramy to watch sports on television with him when he got home. The boy seemed to acquiesce reluctantly, and Rayford confided his misgivings to Irene. He doesn't have to be a jock, but does he have to turn every ball game into an opportunity to preach to me? If I wanted to know what he learned in Sunday school or church, I'd go. Irene held her tongue, which wasn't easy. Not that long ago, she would have immediately told him he ought to go. He had fallen wholly out of the habit, and the last time he had shown up on a Sunday morning was the previous Christmas, when Ramy had played a bathrobed shepherd in the children's drama. Rayford drove separately and slipped out as soon as Ramy's part was over. Irene had been tempted to rail against him, to demand to know who he thought he was. to ask him what he was so afraid of. But she was learning. Slowly, painfully, she was learning. Jackie had urged her to go to the pastor for counseling about Rayford, and Reverend Billings had brought his own wife into the sessions, partly for appearances, but also for her input. They had persuaded Irene that her best hope for Rayford was to stop nagging him. But Jackie's own story of how she loved her husband into the faith was most powerful to Irene. That, she told the Billingses, was one reason she had to counter their suggestion that she try to get Rayford to come for counseling too. "He's just too far from this yet," she said. "It's as if we have an unspoken truce. I will not keep pushing him to attend church, and he will not disparage me from switching to New Hope." Irene's new resolve was not easy. She had fallen into a habit of seemingly passive comments, and it didn't seem natural for her to put up with Rayford's lame excuses. Her last volley stuck in her brain and shamed her. He had said something about how he really wanted to go, but he was so tired and overworked that he really needed the break. "As if sitting in a pew for a brief part of the morning is more taxing than 18 holes of golf," she had said. To his credit, he had simply fallen silent and left in a huff. She could be grateful for that. When she arrived home from a convicting sermon, she and Ramey having picked up their traditional fast food lunch on the way, Irene could hardly wait for Rayford to return from his golf outing. But when he got there, she nearly overwhelmed him. No surprise to her, he was cautious and quiet, now wanting to just relax and watch TV. She wanted him to spend time with Ramey, of course, but she had to begin strong with this new effort to simply love and accept him. "How'd you shoot today?" she said, embracing him and clearly surprising him. Same old, same old. Looked like a pro on a couple of holes, made everybody else look better on the rest." "Oh, I know you're better than that. I'll bet you shot the lowest score." He looked embarrassed. "Well, actually, Jack won today, but I was second by only a stroke." "See? If you had more time to play, you'd beat him regularly." "Well, that's what I was thinking." When he went to raid the pantry for snacks, she said, "I'll get that for you, hun." Again, he looked suspicious. She went so far as to suggest he have a Coke because she would rather he not drink in front of Ramey, and she had smelled alcohol on his breath. He hesitated, as if he wanted to suggest a beer or something stronger, but he acceded, and she set him up with chips and dip too. "Four-wheeling today?" Ramey said as he ran through the house. Normally, Irene would have glared at Rayford, daring him to again deny the boy, after having promised him so many times. But she just waited in the kitchen, out of sight, hoping, praying. Maybe next week, sport. Come watch the game with me, huh?" "Maybe next week," Ramey said, and Irene was impressed. "Don't say I didn't ask." "Then don't say you didn't promise." Irene heard the front door slam and Rayford calling out, "Hey, Ramey!" She bitterly wanted to scold Rayford and ask what he'd expected, but she merely came in and sat next to him, watching the game with him. Later, while tucking Ramey in, she urged him to try to be understanding. "I know Dad's disappointed you many times, but we have to love him and accept him, and it wouldn't hurt you to do the right thing, even if he doesn't. Like watch the Bears with him? You know I'm more into basketball. I'll watch the Bulls with him this spring." After they had prayed together, Ramey said, "Mom, is Dad going to hell?" She sighed. "Frankly, I can't tell where your dad is on all this. He claims to believe in God, and it's not for us to say." "Well, I'm not letting him go to hell. What if his plane crashed, or he got hit by a car, or—" "Oh, Ramey, please, don't talk like that." "Well, it's either true or it's not, Mom. I mean, Pastor Billings talks about that all the time. We never know how much time we have on this earth." "I know." Maybe Ramey would be the catalyst to bring Rayford to Christ. Irene would have no trouble with that. Lucinda Washington, Global Weekly's Chicago bureau chief, had insisted that Cameron Williams visit her the next time he came through the city. It had not been that long since his story ran on the abortive Russian invasion of Israel. "You know you need to talk to me," she had emailed him. She was right. And though she refused to call him by his nickname, he loved seeing and talking with her. She was like a second mother. 50-ish and heavy-set with a dark chocolate complexion, she was beloved by her employees, to whom she was ferociously loyal. They especially seemed to appreciate that when she was elevated from their ranks to be their superior, she had not moved to a corner office. What would I find there but more stuff to look at out more windows? The authority, such as it is, doesn't come from the office, it comes from the heart. Cue the violins, Buck had said, and she just sat there, smiling and shaking her head. I read something in your piece, Cameron, she said. I figured you would. Between the lines. Yeah, I know. God got your attention, didn't he? Buck sat facing her in her cluttered digs, slouching uncomfortably in a straight-backed chair, his feet crossed on a corner of her desk. He nodded. If you were my son, I'd whoop you upside the head sitting like that, tearing up your spine. You don't still smack Lionel, do you? Buck said, peeking at the photo of the smooth-faced youngster. Can't catch him anymore, but he knows I can still take him. Lionel was around 12. Buck wanted to keep talking about the boy, to keep Lucinda out of his head. As much as he admired her, she would not let up on him. And I can still take you, Mr. Senior Writer, all up into your young self. Tell me where you found that scripture you used in your cover piece. They watch me like a hawk, so I can hardly ever get away with that. Next thing you know, they'll be letting you start proselytizing. Buck told her that Chaim Rosenzweig, an avowed agnostic like himself, had put him in touch with religious scholars. You couldn't call me. I've been in the Word longer than those old coots, and I see stuff in the Old Testament they've missed. You'd have pointed me to the same passages? Course I would. You think that wasn't the first thing that came to my mind when I heard of a massive attack gone bad? Prophesied, honey. Shouldn't have surprised anybody who knew a thing about the Bible, which you don't. I do now. You don't know much, but I dare say what you do know has shaken you to your core. You got that right, Lucy. She cocked her head and glared at him. Lucinda. She was anything but a Lucy. She had told him too many times to count. Cameron, why don't your Ivy League head just admit you don't know as much as you thought you knew? Humble yourself a mile or two and come to church with me and mine. For one thing, it'd be a cultural thing you'd never experienced before. Even if our enthusiasm and our music and all overwhelm you, if you keep your ears and your mind open, you might just learn something from people you didn't think had a thing to teach you. Now, don't say that, Lucinda. I've told you and told you. I've learned a lot from you. She seemed to assess him. God's going to get you yet, boy. I mean, you were right there when it happened. And then you read ancient texts that look like they could have been written yesterday. You can't deny the miracle. You can't deny the hand of God. You can't even claim to still be an agnostic. Buck shook his head. You're right, as always. You're just a step away from Jesus. Oh, I don't know about that. I can't deny the supernatural in what happened. It makes no sense otherwise. But if God protected Israel, okay, so why did God protect Israel? A nation that denies Jesus as the Messiah. So you are thinking. Well, let me ask you this. Would you rather have a God who treats his children like they deserve to be treated? The Bible calls the Jews his chosen people time after time after time. He's not going to unchoose them. He's going to do what he promised, regardless of how they respond.